Most basic question here, why is cell phone jamming technology prohibited in state prison facilities?
Yeah, so contraband cell phones have been pouring into state and federal prisons by literally the tens of thousands, including all across Georgia. And they're being used to perpetrate some of the most heinous crimes. Most time we put people behind bars and we just assume that their ability to harm ordinary Americans living in their communities ends, but that's not the case. Contraband cell phones are being used to orchestrate hits, to run drug operations, and otherwise orchestrate criminal activities. For years, the federal government has allowed state and local prisons to take some actions to address contraband cell phones, but they have denied state and local governments the ability to jam contraband cell phone signals. And a lot of these law enforcement officials believe that jamming would be a really important tool to turn these, now expensive smartphones into effectively useless paperweights. The reason the federal government has denied states the ability to do this is because they've read federal law as prohibiting jamming of devices. But what we're proposing to do here at the FCC is take another look at that federal law and say, actually, all that federal law prohibits potentially is the jamming of authorized devices. And so if you classify contraband cell phones as non-authorized devices, then the theory would go that you could jam that without running into that prohibition of federal law.
Okay. You mentioned, that law enforcement has been rallying for this. We read that there are also about 24 states that are in favor of that cell jamming technology. Has that at all played a part in you all reconsidering the FCC rules?
Yeah, that's been a significant part of it. You look at the state attorney generals all across the country, including in Georgia, and they've been fighting for a long time to give law enforcement in their jurisdictions the necessary tools. I think their advocacy over years has helped change minds here in Washington, and that's why we're able to move forward with this planned vote.
I know you visited the Supermax prison in Arkansas. Did you see anything there that was alarming or that related to this trend of cell phones inside of prisons and maybe a need for jamming technology?
I had the chance to visit Varner Supermax in Arkansas with Senator Tom Cotton and the Attorney General of Arkansas, A.G. Griffin. And what we found there was really quite shocking. The law enforcement officials that work inside these prisons told us directly that probably the hardest and most life-threatening portion of their job is identifying and finding contraband cell phones. What they told us is that contraband cell phones are effectively the root of so many of the evils that take place inside prisons, whether, again, it's, running drug operations, ordering hits. And so prisoners, inmates, will do almost anything to get and then retain those contraband cell phones. So it's a very dangerous operation. In fact, a couple of years ago, I was in South Carolina and had the chance to meet with one of the prison officials who was charged with finding contraband cell phones. And he was so good at it that a contraband cell phone was used to call in a hit on him. And one morning he woke up in his house and his front door was kicked down at 5:30 in the morning. And he was shot several times in the chest. Miraculously, he has survived. And he has continued to be an advocate to this day for allowing prisons additional tools, including jamming, to stop contraband cell phones. So the stories that we see of the harms that are perpetrated with this go on and on. In Georgia alone, there's thousands and thousands of contraband cell phones, and the stories are truly alarming. There was an instance in Atlanta not that long ago where two 13-year-old kids were shot at a birthday party through a hit that was ordered by a gang member in prison behind bars through a contraband cell phone.
Yeah, Lee and I have heard some of those similar stories, like what you mentioned in our research about this. Kind of started with us doing research about drones dropping off contraband at prisons, and we linked it back to cell phones, and that was what the Attorney General's office told us, that the cell phone jamming technology would make a big difference in that type of effort. So I actually was curious if you were familiar with any of the things that they're seeing here in Georgia. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Are you, it sounds like you are in favor of cell phone jamming technology.
There's a couple steps here at the FCC. So step one is going to vote on a proposal to allow it, and I'm going to vote in favor of that proposal. We'll then have a record that develops, and then we'll reach a final decision, hopefully in the next couple of months, that will authorize it or not, depending on where the FCC vote ultimately goes. I'm inclined to vote that way. We'll see what the record shows. But to your point, we're seeing these cell phones that are pouring in through all sorts of means. We have drones that are dropping them over fences. We've had potato guns that are shooting them over fences. People dropping them over fences. Of course, they get smuggled in on people's bodies. But also, when we were in Varner Supermax in Arkansas, we saw how the equipment that is delivered to the prisons oftentimes will have contraband cell phones smuggled inside the different types of equipment and pipes that go into the facility. So they're coming in all sorts of ways. But if we can render them effectively useless, that will create a disincentive for people to go and take those risks of getting them into prisons. And of course, they won't want to pay thousands of dollars for contraband cell phones if they're not going to work.
Yeah, I clearly there are a lot of pros, especially for the law enforcement community, to cell phone jamming technology. Are there any cons to this type of legislation moving forward across the country?
There's been some opposition to allowing jamming. It tends to fall into a couple buckets. One, people are concerned that jamming could go too broad and go well beyond the walls of the prison and therefore impact someone in their car driving nearby and interfere with those communications. We're sensitive to that. And I think that's part of why it's taken the federal government so long to get here. But the answer is the technology has evolved in recent years. We can do really sort of narrow, targeted jamming over a defined geography. And so that's one of the things that we're going to look at is how do we make sure that wherever we authorize this, it doesn't have spillover and negative effects on people that are legitimately using their cell phones nearby. But look, a lot of these prisons, like the one we were in at Varner, are located pretty far out of the way. And so this isn't going to be the right fit for every single prison in every single part of the country. But we should at least give a additional toolkit so that where it does make sense, it can be deployed.
An FCC spokesperson told us earlier this year that, states like Georgia are able to use some contraband interdiction technology. Do you think it's gotten to a point, or has it always been to a point, where that type of technology just isn't as effective as cell phone jammers?
I think you don't just make sure you have the right tool for the right facility. So sometimes what we have out there there's systems that will be the first point of entry for a phone call. And so that system can identify potentially, is this a contraband cell phone, in which case I'll block the call, or is it not, in which case I'll let it go through. That could be a great solution in some environments, but there's a lot of places out there where jamming is going to be more effective solution. So we just want more options on the table. Again, we've taken steps over the years. It's helped a little bit, but this is the one tool that law enforcement has been asking for the most.
So the vote is next week. If the board, says yes, and how long do you estimate it would take for you all to do the necessary research and testing, I imagine, to see this effort be able to go into effect?
So assuming the FCC adopts this decision, there'll be a couple weeks or months of comments where the public can let us know how they feel about it. All different stakeholders can weigh in, and then we'll proceed with drafting up a final order. And then our decision will be effective some short period of time after that. So potentially not this year, but we are moving as quickly as we can because we believe that lives are at stake here.